morning, everyone. It's now 3 minutes after the hour of 9 o'clock. Today, Wednesday, October 4, 2017. We are convening the Water Resources Committee. This time, we'd like to ask this room to come to order and ask for decorum and request that we all silence our cell phones. Moving on, we want to introduce the members of this committee. Myself, Alika Atai, as chairman. We have Vice Chair Ellie Cochran, who's currently excused. I just saw her in the halls. Will be joining us shortly. In attendance, we got Robert Carroll.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. Excused, we have Mike White. In attendance, Yukile Sugimura.
Good morning, Chair.
In attendance, Kelly King. And in attendance, Stacy Crivello.
Good morning, Chair.
We also have from the administration, I want to recognize this morning the Director of Water Supply, Dave Taylor. And staff, Civil Engineer, Department of Water Supply is also Jace Miyabuchi. Okay. Representing Corporation Counsel, Deputy Corporation Counsel, Jennifer Owana. Committee staff, want to recognize and say good morning, Pauline Martins. We also have Legislative Analyst Maggie Clark. Out in Hana, Don Lono, Lanai Denise Fernandez, and Molokai Ella Alcon. Members, today we have one item on our agenda, and it is WR20. WR20 pertaining to water services. But first, I would like to begin by taking public testimony. Public testimony. Good morning, Ms. Cochran, in our attendance. Public testimony for individuals testifying here in the chamber. Please sign up at the desk in the lobby. If testifying from a remote site, please sign up with your district office staff. Testimony will be limited to the items listed on the agenda today, and pursuant to the rules of the council, each testifier will be allowed to testify for up to 3 minutes per item. Today, as a reminder, we only have one item, WR20. When testifying, please state your name and any organization you may be representing. Right now, we want to check in with the district offices. Out in Hana office, Don Lono, do you have anyone wishing to testify?
Good morning, Chair. This is Don Lono at the Hana office, and there is no one waiting to testify.
Thank you. Lanai office, Denise Fernandez, do you have anyone wishing to testify?
Good morning, Chair. This is Denise Fernandez on Lanai, and there is no one waiting to testify.
Thank you. Molokai office, Ella Alcon, do you have anyone wishing to testify?
Good morning, Chair. This is Ella Alcon on Molokai, and there is no one here waiting to testify.
Staff, you want to call any of the testifiers here in the chamber?
Mr. Chair, our first testifier will be Jim Smith testifying on WR20, to be followed by Lawrence Carnicelli.
Chair Atai, members of the Water Resource Committee. My name is Jim Smith. This is a very important meeting. The subject, backflow valves, affects everyone up country. And I don't believe your notice is clear enough. The item is identified as water services, period. Doesn't say could be water services anywhere, anything, anyhow. So I don't know, so I'd ask you, please, to reconvene this meeting after. Reconvene for the subject of backflow valves, because certainly there should be more people here on an issue as meaningful as that. The second issue is I find so much simple about this. You have to have a cause, you have to have an effect, you have to have a solution. All right, so I live in Maui Ranch Estates. We've lost water. We've had county water come in, county water come out. We've had breaks, fires, everything. no, zero infection, no, zero inadequacies of water. You know, we weren't poisoned, we weren't infected. It's ridiculous to, at this point in our history, to say that when the public code, the code in the water works, in the public works says you have to have. You don't need two. If the problem is public health, the department should pay for anything that needs to be done because it's responsible for public health. If money's not the issue, it's a director who has a responsibility and doesn't do it. It's a council that adopts an ordinance that is so convoluted in 2012, in effect gives all the authority or power to the director. So the director doesn't want to do it. It's not done. There's no safety. That's simple. And you are taking that up. I ask you not to file this at this critical point in time, because now is when we need to see this political issue. Power of an individual versus common consent to be governed by law. Political issue, political system, so specific, so obvious, and so important. You're talking $9 million if the figures are correct, but more importantly, it's not the money. There's no illness threatening me. There's no fear. There's no conjuring up of a demon you must meet head on as a director. Huh? Look, this is so important that this council recognize that you are all of us and we are all of you, and you got to stand up to this stuff. You can't participate.
3 minutes.
1997, the idea was focus on results. That meant we had no council. That meant we had no oversight. That meant we went through planning with the same thing, and water and the same thing, and Chapter 19 and the same thing. And you look at those ordinances today, and when they were untouched, and you recognize it's verbosity rules. And that shifts it to the individual, who's the only person that can understand the gobbledygook.
3 minutes, 30 seconds.
So I would ask you, please, feet on the ground. Bring this horse under the rain again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members, any questions for clarification? Yes.
So thank you for being here and passionately giving us your feelings. But I'm listening to you, so you're saying that this bill then would affect you as a resident, and that's or that because backflow preventers, is that what you're? That's what you're.
I'm saying, number one, there's no problem. Number two, and it hasn't been defined if there is a problem. You haven't even looked at the evidence as to whether disease is created. You haven't looked at the evidence as to whether poisoning would happen. So you have no evidence, so it's your judgment I'm concerned about the facts, okay? That's what was the other?
That's what I want to know. Thank you. I was just.
I was ready to go again, but and passion, by the way, is a defect in the circumstance, because really, people who are sensible, they don't get passionate about, rights and things that are inexpensive, not expensive, like a car.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you so much.
Any more questions? Nope.
Next testifier is Lawrence Carnicelli, testifying on WR20, to be followed by Rosemary Robbins, also testifying on WR20.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Council. My name is Lawrence Carnicelli, offering the following comments as Government Affairs Director for the Realtors Association of Maui. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on water resources. Item number 20, regarding which properties should be required to have backflow prevention systems installed. RAM supports the intention of this measure to protect our public water system from accidental contamination. However, RAM has concerns about the bill, given that the imposition of this requirement could negatively affect residential property owners by slowing down access to building permits, requiring expensive water system improvements, and creating requirements for annual testing and compliance reporting. We also believe that these requirements should only be made where absolutely necessary and should not be made broadly. The Department of Water Supply's director has met with RAM on several occasions, and we do believe that he understands our concerns. However, we would like the council to also be aware of our concerns for potentially unintended consequences that could arise in this legislation. The first concern is the requirement being placed on unknowing residential properties that are in no way a threat to the public water system. Again, we support the protection where needed. We would like to acknowledge that we are okay with this being a requirement for new construction. However, casting a broad net requirement could be costly and harmful burden to homeowners that in no way are a threat of contamination. Our next concern is a wide-ranging requirement that anyone requesting a building permit be required to install a backflow preventer. This will disincentivize people from doing what is right, legal, and the correct thing to do. People will be less likely to get a permit if it is going to gosh, I can't even read my own writing here, a larger expense to install a backflow preventer. They will most likely move forward without a permit. We will also be concerned about the costly requirement of annual testing and replacement of these fixtures. Not only do they cost hundreds of dollars to install, but also to maintain, test, and replace. They are known to only last a few years, and if they need to be replaced, we are potentially putting an additional burden on people that may not need them in the first place. Who bears that cost load? We would also like to note that installation of backflow preventer fixtures can require expensive water system improvements in and above just the cost of the fixture. Again, the question is who should bear that cost? Lastly, I would like to restate that we're in support of the department's intention to further protect our community's precious resource, but I'd also like to thank you for hearing our concerns. Mahalo.
Thank you. Members, further questions? Thank you, Mr. Carnicelli.
Our next testifier and final testifier signed up in the chambers is Rosemary Robbins, testifying on WR 20.
Good morning, everybody. Wednesday, October 4th, Water Resources Committee. Concerned citizen Rosemary Robbins here. I was here when the two previous speakers spoke on this same issue back a while ago, and it doesn't seem to have gotten any better, the situation. I received my copy in the mail, had requested that on Saturday, and people that I met over the weekend who said, "What's up?" and "What's up with water?" I said, "Well, I just got a thing in yesterday. I'm going to have to read it, but I did a quickie last night," meaning Saturday night. And they said the water department is worried about the waters being contaminated by others, when the history has been that they have contaminated other people with some health issues. Those of us who worked with Senator Dan Inouye on the upcountry contaminated water lived through all of that, including some of the ailments from that. I'm saying that firsthand, but I'm not the only one. So just to let you know, there's a lot of distrust out there in the community on this. And they thought it was a bad joke for this to come forward. They did say that, it seems as though the county is asking for permits for everything. Used to be able to watch the sunrise without a permit. Used to be able to do this without a permit. That's accurate. They're paying attention. And so this has some expensive permitting involved in the recommendation here. And the permits can be waived solely by the director of water. Little scary on that one, that could be one person's decision. When where we are today, he was not the director when this began, but he's been the director for a significant amount of time and a significant amount of meetings and hearing from people. When I went through those materials earlier this week, I discovered one that they were talking about certificates of occupancy and the owner shall complete, blah, blah, blah. It's identifying 14.04.070, and then in parentheses, this sounds like what happened last month. It's two different outfits that the same issue is being identified under this. In one case, excuse me. In one case, the identification goes parentheses G45, and in another case, it goes G4. So there is, even though this has been before us
3 minutes.
a number of times, we're still having problems and stuff being corrected over there. So certainly not to pass any of this on first reading until those kinds of things get set up. And also to remember that the community is watching. So if we don't have the talent, we need to recruit it. PDQ, we're playing catch-up ball. If we do have it, let's kick it into
3 minutes, 30
activities that are in
seconds.
terms of principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robbins. Members, any questions for clarifications? Thank you.
You're welcome.
No more?
Chair, there's no one else signed up to testify.
Chair,
Yes.
can I ask a privilege of bringing a previous testifier up for questions? I actually have a question for Mr. Carnicelli.
If there's
possible?
no objections, members? Go ahead.
Aloha. Thank you for being here. You know, your testimony is always so thorough. It takes me a couple of seconds to process and lean through for the questions. But basically, I just wanted to ask you if I know you're representing the Realtors Association of Maui. So are you folks in favor of leaving it the same? And just from reading through your testimony, you're in favor of leaving it the same, but possibly adding new construction to that list of when backflow meters are required?
Gosh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Here's what we're in. It was more concerns. That's kind of when I read through the legislation. I still, and that's why I kind of like, anyways, getting the presentation first sometimes, because I might have missed. I don't want to say something then going like, okay, that's not what the law. That's not what the bill really says, because I know it's been tweaked a couple times since last year when we talked about this before. So the concern is any building permit, and you got to get one. That you got to get a backflow preventer, and I think that's been taken care of in the legislation, but I'm not sure.
Well, the legislation, as it currently is, has a list of circumstances and permits that would require the backflow
I thought those all got lined out.
And then the proposal is to line that all out and replace it with review of any building permit application during any other review by the department. So it's requiring the installation of backflow preventers during its review of any building permit application. So my question to you is, are you in favor of, that's the broad, I'm assuming that's the broad statement that you are worried about. And so conversely, are you in favor of leaving it the way it is and adding on new construction, or just leaving it the way it is? Or
you know what? I didn't go through the list specifically. Like one of the things for me is like swimming pools, right? That's everybody thinks about swimming pools. Oh my gosh, that's the thing that's going to drain into the system. But the fill valve for a swimming pool is above the water line, so there's an air gap there. So it actually is by definition is its own backflow preventer. So, the pool couldn't drain back into the system. So it's things like that. If we wanted to go through the list, I think that it would be, okay, is this something that is needed would be the question. And I admittedly, I didn't go through that list because I just said, oh, okay, they're lining that out and they're just saying they're casting the broad net. So that's where that was what my testimony is about. And I guess maybe that's trying to clarify what you're asking.
Okay, yeah, no, I thought maybe you had looked at that list and you're good with everything else, but because there's quite a long list on here of specific items, but you said...
I think that would be, again, trying to create legislation specific to this, and this can be a little bit tedious because they're like, okay, well, what did we forget? And you say like, including but not limited to, then all of a sudden you go back to the discretion of the director, which some people don't like. So lists are tough, and a broad net is tough, and that's why you guys get paid the big dollars to do what you guys do.
Okay, I was just trying to find out if you guys had a specific, idea of what you were asking for.
You know what I'll do is I'll go back through the list, and I'll look at it, and then I'll resubmit something in writing to the committee that way as well.
Okay,
right.
thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you.
The privilege.
Staff, any other testifiers, staff?
No other testifiers at this time, Chair.
Members, if there are no objections, I will close public testimony.
No objection.
No objection.
Okay. Members, today we will discuss a bill relating to cross-connection. This is our bill WR20, this is on agenda, WR20, Water Services. And today we will discuss a bill relating to cross-connection and backflow prevention. As you can see on the agenda, this bill was recommitted to this committee last term for further work and consideration. This is an item that I inherited on my master agenda. It was then discussed, and we met on this item last on May 17th of 2017. This is a complex bill, but a very important one. So I'd like us to continue work on the revised version of the bill, which was transmitted by Corporation Counsel back on September 21 of 2016. This bill is important in the terms of health and safety and protecting our water supply for possible contamination. At our last meeting on this matter, the Director of Water Supply gave a presentation, which all of you should have copies of this presentation on your Granicus. And this presentation outlined real-life examples of serious water supply contamination due to a lack of backflow prevention and cross-connection regulation. I know we discussed this somewhat at length and trying to understand this, and I think collectively, members, we all agreed that our water supply system at utmost should be concerned about our public's health and our public's safety. And we discussed also the economics of the ramifications of this bill. It should be placed retroactively. Right now, I'd like to turn things to Director Taylor to see if he would like to share any comments pertaining to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for summarizing. Just a little more, summary of how we got here. Obviously, backflow preventers, I think everyone knows, are there to prevent any contamination on the customer side to get back into the public system. This used to be required in the County of Maui under the Maui County Board of Water Supply under its rules. When, I think it was in 2002 or 2003, whenever it was, when the Department of Water Supply came under the mayor, there was an effort to move the rules into ordinances. Somehow this one was missed. So this used to be required. It's required in all the other counties. It's required in most municipalities. It used to be required here. It just got missed in the migration from rules of the board to ordinances of the county. So this has been our effort to finish that migration. So I just want to reiterate it. It's something that historically been done. It's the issue last time, I think some of the testifiers really pointed to it, was about the retrofitting of existing properties. That's really where we hung up last time. I think everyone's in general agreement moving forward. When you're building something new, it's not a big deal in your plumbing, to put this in. The issue was retrofitting plumbing when you weren't going to touch the water system. We've gone back and forth a few times. There are some issues that become kind of complex between this ordinance, this proposed ordinance, and state law that are driving us back to what you have in front of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Corp Counsel to explain why the language we put in this ordinance is important because of how it may or may not affect state laws that we may need to rely on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Corp Counsel to explain why we're proposing sticking with the language you see today.
Ms. Wong.
Great. And Chair, just real quickly, are we looking at the markup bill that is listed as a markup bill?
I can get into that.
dated May 17th?
I can explain all
Is
of
that the one you're going to be explaining?
Well, there are two drafts in your meeting materials for today. The first draft was transmitted to this committee by the department back in September 21, 2017. And that draft, the September 21st one, required all water consumers and property owners to install backflow preventers. Now, there was a committee meeting in October 2016, and there was some discussion about whether to exempt certain properties, like residential properties. So after that meeting, OCS staff went and revised the September 21 draft to require backflow preventers only on certain properties. And so that's the draft you see in red line that was posted for that May 17, 2017 meeting. So really, in the meeting materials, although there's a lot of stuff in there, there's really only two drafts. The draft that the department transmitted, and then the draft that OCS staff revised based on comments at the October meeting. So in your discussion today, you can really refer to each one. The draft that the department proposed that requires all properties to have a backflow preventer, or the draft posted in May that really just said certain properties, like properties with pools, irrigation systems, wells. Those properties should only have a backflow preventer. So really, when in your discussion today, look at both to determine how you want to proceed.
Sure. Well, okay, but now I'm confused because there's a draft that says markup from the May 17th, and that one does eliminate all those, but you said that one includes them. The red line draft just eliminates all that whole list.
It basically specifies who should have a backflow preventer.
It doesn't specify. It says just any review of any building permit application, and then it redlines through that whole list. That's what I'm looking at from the May 17th.
Okay.
Yeah, the markup.
So the
Okay.
markup doesn't specify.
Okay, I think at that point, I think maybe I told OCS to let's go back to that September 21st draft. So the red line should probably now look like the September 21st draft.
Okay, so that's the one we're looking at, the May 17th
So it was the September 21st
markup.
draft, then changes by OCS, and then it was probably direction from me, let's go back because we have a new committee that didn't review that September 21st draft.
Okay.
So it kind of,
Okay.
September 21st, then the revisions, and then it kind of goes back to the September 21st. Okay, so I do want to point out, though, in the Maui County Code, there is already provision for requirement of backflow preventers, and that's in 1404.040, the water service installation section of the code. So that provision requires installation of backflow protection devices and does not have a limitation on who or what the property is, except for it does state it in the installation part. So we're kind of looking forward in that sense. And that section states the consumer shall install at the consumer's expense and shall connect to the department's facilities that portion of the water system for the consumer's property, including backflow protection devices that are situated on the consumer's shutoff valve. So there is already a provision in the Maui County Code requiring installation of backflow preventers. So at the last meeting in May, and there were only 3 meetings on this topic so far, at the end of the meeting, Chair White brought up retroactivity. And it was intended in drafting this bill that it would be retroactive to cover existing structures and properties, because really at any time an existing structure or property could be causing hazardous conditions. So if this committee wants it to be retroactive, I do want to add a provision at the end that says that these provisions of the section shall be retroactive. If this committee in its discussion does not want it to be retroactive, then I'll state, otherwise. But I'd like to add a section in there, whether it's retroactive or not. Now, further to this, I do want to point out that there is a current State of Hawaii administrative rule covering cross-connection and backflow control. And these rules give the director of the Department of Health authority to inspect for cross-connections or other hazards. And when there is a hazardous condition, the director of the Department of Health will require a water customer to correct the condition. It also authorizes the Director of Health to contact our Director of Department of Water Supply to immediately discontinue service until the condition is corrected. Now, in that rule, it also states that if a county adopts an ordinance governing cross-connection and backflow prevention, and the provisions of the ordinance and the methods of enforcement by the county government are improved by writing by the Director of DOH, said ordinance and not the HAR, Hawaii Administrative Rules, shall control the matter of cross-connection and backflow prevention in that county. So there is a current rule in the state of Hawaii, Hawaii Administrative Rules that covers this, but it really is kind of a basic rule. It doesn't require all, it doesn't say it requires all, but it does allow for the director or its representative to go in and inspect, and if there is a hazardous condition, the director has enforcement capabilities. So, with regard to retroactivity, if you guys are talking, you guys want this to just go forward and not talk about existing structures and lots, that really limits our director to go and enforce a situation where there is hazardous conditions on an already existing lot or structure. The Hawaii state rule basically is retroactive. The Director of Department of Health can go in at any time and inspect any structure, existing or new, to determine if there's a hazardous condition and require backflow preventer. So if you guys want to take out that retroactivity, this ordinance may control now, and then we lose all of that enforcement for anything on existing structures. So that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions, Member Sugimura?
Yeah. So just for clarification, so on the retroactivity, so you're saying that if this is enacted, then what would the department do? They go back and let everybody know who has a water meter or any kind of water fixture that they have to install this backflow preventer?
If I could maybe give a couple of examples of I think what Corp Counsel was explaining. Let's start with what we're worried about first. So let's just say right now, I don't know if Wailuku Heights has backflow preventers. Let's say they don't. So let's say lots in Wailuku Heights don't have backflow preventers. There's no problem. And somebody starts illegally running some sort of automotive repair place in their garage, and they're using their sinks and have batteries in there, and we become aware of this. And right now, today, we're saying, look, that may contaminate the water system. Well, we're going to tell the planning department to enforce on a zoning violation, but that's going to take months. Right now, today, I could call up the Department of Health and say, I need you to use your legal authority to enforce on them using the state law. If we passed an ordinance that didn't allow retroactivity, I think what Corp Counsel is saying is our local ordinance would govern over the state law, and the state law would now no one would have retroactive authority. And this hypothetical example, I wouldn't be able to pull their meter or order a backflow preventer, neither would the Department of Health. And that's our concern, is that if we don't allow retroactivity under circumstances in our bill, then even the retroactivity that the state law allows evaporates. Is that a good example, a good explanation of that?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So that's really the concern we have about retroactivity. I can tell you from a practical standpoint, we have no resource ability to start at one end of the island and go to the other and go lot by lot. We'd have to send somebody out, inspect it, send a letter, and try to make them put in backflow preventers. We would use our retroactive authority just for situations like the one I just defined previously. That is our intention, and that intention would be very clear in the verbatim minutes of this meeting and the committee report. If we did try to enforce and somebody said, well, they're cherry picking me, the director has a personal vendetta, they can go to the board and they can appeal my decision. So there is an appeals process with the board that has nothing to do with me. So I think there's a built-in safeguard with the appeals process to the board to make sure that the director does not overstep his or her authority, which is what one of the testifiers was concerned about. So my view of this is some of the testifiers make a good point, right? We don't want to give a director too much authority, which I think this builds in because we've got the appeals process. At the same time, we have to recognize that there is inherent risk, and unless we have an ordinance that covers it, we have no action we can take. So again, that's why we think that what's in front of you is our best path forward. It may not be perfect, but I think between this bill, the fact that there is an appeals process, and there's still the council, which are going to be watching us on this, and there's just a lack of resources for us to just decide to go after every single property. I think from a practical standpoint, this is going to get the results everyone wants. And we support moving forward with it, with the retroactivity, especially because we're concerned about the DOH responsibility or the DOH authority evaporating if we don't include it.
Member Cochran.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Department, for being here. So let me go back, Director Taylor, to your opening comments. In reference to this has been around since Board of Supervisor days, and I think in 2002 there was a conversion to our existing format, and this just kind of got lost in the shuffle, so to speak. So you're trying to, so that's like 15 years ago. So 15 years from 2002 till now, this ordinance has just been kind of not being practiced, not looked at, because it hasn't rolled over to our new system of a Department of Water Supply.
So under the Board of Water Supply, it was in the rules.
Right.
Everything in Chapter 14, all those ordinances, I believe, all used to be rules in the Board of Water Supply rules. And one by one, over the years that you've mentioned, they were migrated into ordinances which were adopted or passed by this council. So that took a while. This one, for whatever reason, didn't go through that process. That was, I'm not sure exactly when that was realized. It's certainly realized in the early days of this administration. We had been, through our review process, requiring it. We didn't say, well, the board rules didn't make it to ordinances, so forget about it. Every time somebody comes in, we red mark it, shall install a backflow preventer. We've held up permits and held up subdivisions and those kind of things to make people do this. We've used that general authority we have that we're not issuing you the approval. Some of these things have been challenged, and in discussion with Corp Counsel, they're saying, look, to clean this up, let's make it really clear. Let's migrate this to be a law, not just a practice or not under the old board rules. And so I don't want to call this just simply housekeeping, but it started as a housekeeping issue. It started as a migrating the existing board rule that we had been practicing, even though it had never been migrated to an ordinance, and doing a housekeeping exercise to make it an ordinance. And that's still at the heart of it, what this is. It is what the county's always done. It's become a little sloppy because of the movement from a board to a county department.
Thank you. And a follow-up, Chair. And so these changes being proposed are, what's the justification for these changes primarily? Because if it's something that just should have been migrated as is, but now I'm seeing, there's tweaking and there's changes. So what's changed then, and why it's being presented the way it is today?
Well, it was drafted basically off of the board rules, as well as a review of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply rules and other jurisdictions around the country. So that's the way it was drafted. We used the board rules and kind of fix it up using other jurisdictions' language. So it should really remain the same, in essence, from what the board rules were. The changes, all the red marks, that happened after the October 2016 meeting, after the discussion on whether residential should be exempted and what kinds of situations would we want to have backflow preventers required. So all the red marks happened after the October 16 meeting and by OCS staff. The September 21st submittal on this bill should be pretty much coincide with the existing board rule and, taking into account Honolulu rules and other jurisdictions' rules.
Okay. And Chair,
Yes.
I know, Director, you mentioned that you couldn't possibly go from one end of the island to the other and check every single meter, but I mean, I would think that you do have a billing system, so you have every single person that's tied into our system because you bill them. So you have that anyways, point of reference to who all is here and how to get word out and share what we're talking about here that could impact them, like Mr. Smith came to share. My other thing is, do you have a list of existing structures? Because now we're wondering, are we going to do only new permits? Are we going to go retro or not? And you must have a kind of an idea. I mean, here's an industrial area utilizing hazardous waste type things. We probably need to focus there versus an entire subdivision way up on a mountaintop that has no clear connection to us. So one's a lot riskier than the other. So, you know what I mean? You can get sort of a bigger picture view of where you would target more so than others, is what I'm wondering if you have done, and if you have like an existing list that you would retro back to and say, we really feel like you are a great candidate and are risky to our system at this time, and we're going to need you to upgrade.
We do have a list of the installed backflow preventers. Probably our staff and our backflow managers, backflow supervisor, would probably have an idea of saying, hey, this is an area that's always concerned me that doesn't, and we may want to, as you're saying, contact them. From one end of the island to the other kind of scheme, I mean, I happen to know where mine is at my house. It is not visible from the road. In order for someone to know if I had one or not, it's up a hill behind trees on the side of my house. I mean, you'd have to know where it is to find it. It is not at all visible from the road. So again, this idea of going house to house to house, that's not likely to happen. What is likely to happen with this is our backflow prevention people would probably say, look, we've always been concerned about this location, there's an industrial area, everyone has one except for these two. We want to send them letters and start going after these. So it would be really a high risk situation. In fact, we had a situation a couple of years ago. It's actually a former county employee in a different department had, I think, a water tank and no backflow preventer. We became aware of this, and because we knew him, he was in another department, and we said, look, you need to put a backflow preventer, and you got this old rotty tank full of old water that is directly connected to our system. And frankly, we did threaten to pull his meter, though we had no probably legal authority to do it, but we knew him and he worked for another department, and we strong-armed him and got him to do it. But that's one of the things that was early in this administration. We realized, look, if this wasn't somebody we knew who had an attorney, we might have had a lot of trouble doing that. And that's one of the reasons we said we need to get serious about this and make this an ordinance so that we actually have strong legal basis and not just counting on our ability to, coerce people out of goodness to the community.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I have more,
Member
but
Cochran.
I can let others
Yield.
ask.
Ms. King.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for yielding. It's a good discussion. So I'm a little unclear because I thought I heard Corp Counsel say there's already an ordinance that requires backflow protection, backflow preventers. So, and I think you said it was 1401-040 or is that the correct one?
1404-040.
Okay, so you said we already
C,
have a requirement. So is what we're talking about here just to change that requirement to make it retroactive, or are we trying to actually change? Because what we have in front of us, it looks like a whole new bill. I mean, it looks like a whole new section. So are we trying to amend a section that already exists? Are we trying to add a whole new section? Are we only focusing on retroactivity? What are we doing here? We've got so many documents in Granicus. I don't have a clear vision of what you're asking us to do here.
So basically, 1404-040, Water Service Installation Section C, it has a provision that says that the consumer shall install backflow prevention devices. And that's really all it says. It doesn't say anything about the kind of protection devices. It doesn't say anything about the maintenance of them or enforcement by the county. So this new bill basically is more detailed than this one section of the code that says it's required.
You're trying to insert this into that same section to detail that statement?
It'll be a different section, and it'll be detailed.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what we're looking at, so right now, there's one sentence under 1404.040. Do we have that in Granicus as it's currently stated?
If you do a search in the Maui County Code, you could get to it.
Okay, but we don't have it in our materials today.
It's not in the materials,
Okay,
no.
so yeah, it would be nice to have the exact wording in there that we know what it says, and then now we know what we're being asked to add to it.
I mean, I do have a copy of it. I could
Okay,
show it to you.
that would be helpful. The other thing is, do we have a definition, because in your latest copy, the markup bill, I didn't see a definition for what is a hazardous condition or what you call high risk. And if we have some kind of definition of what that is that you're likely to be going after, that might help with this bill if we put that in there. That's not under definitions. And then the last thing, I thought I heard you say when you were talking about the HAR that the DOH has the right to inspect for hazardous conditions currently, and they can go in and they can inspect and they can say that someone's water is turned off because it's a hazardous condition. So possibly they have a description of what a hazardous condition is, but then I heard the director say that they don't have that right unless we enact retroactivity. Then we make it retroactive. So now so what is it? I mean, can they do that as it sits now, or are they not? Are they disallowed until we put in some kind of retroactivity?
Sorry, your question was, can DOH?
Well, you mentioned that the state DOH director can come in under current rules, under current Hawaii administrative rules, and has the right to inspect for hazardous conditions. I'm assuming that would happen if there was a complaint. But then the director said, no, they don't have that authority unless we make some kind of retroactivity, so that nobody has that authority.
No. Currently, the director of Department of Health, like you said, has the right to go in and inspect. The director of water supply was saying that if you pass this proposed bill without retroactive effect, then we lose the protection that the Hawaii administrative rule gives us because theirs is retroactive.
So then if we pass, okay, so if we do nothing, then everything stays the same as it is today.
Yes.
And the DOH has that administrative authority?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you do something today, if it's retroactive, like it was intended to be, then we're covered.
Okay.
In terms
Intended by
of what
who?
the current director of Department of Health can do in terms of,
So
going after
intended by who?
existing hazardous conditions. But if you pass a bill that does not make this bill retroactive, then we can't go after someone who has an existing structure and causing, harm, and we lose the protection of the state rule.
Okay. So, but when you say as it was intended, who was intended by who?
By the department.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll yield for now. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Gravello?
Thank you, Chair. So when you say if we don't have this in place, we don't. Department of Health does not do anything. Doesn't HRS supersedes whatever we have for our ordinances or what have you, for our codes?
Well, this is a Hawaii administrative rule, and it's for the entire state. And so if we don't do anything today, then that state rule still controls, and the director of health for the state has authority to remedy the situation.
So help me to understand. So we have authority and the state has authority if we make it happen today. And if we don't make it happen, the state still has authority.
Yeah, so as it stands today, the state has authority to inspect and require remedy. And as it stands today, the director and the Department of Water Supply has authority to require installation of backflow preventers now. If you pass this bill as it is with the retroactive effect, then it's a stronger bill. allows now, instead of the director of health to be the enforcement person, it allows the director of water supply to be the enforcement person, require the maintenance, and fine people if they are in violation.
Excuse me, so the director of water will supersede the authority of the Department of Health?
Yes, because in that HAR, it does state if the county adopts an ordinance that covers cross-connection and backflow prevention, and if the director of health approves that ordinance, then that ordinance controls and no longer the state rule.
It's kind of
So that's why retroactivity is very important in this discussion, because right now we have it with the state rule. If you guys want to eliminate that, then there is no enforcement mechanism for any existing structure that could possibly have contaminating circumstances. And you also have to think about irrigation systems and even small irrigation systems on residential lots. That has the potential for contamination. So it's not only big, and those are the most important, the big industrial, users, but even small residential properties have the potential to contaminate.
Okay, so
Follow-up question, Grill.
Thank you, Chair. For the director, so what mechanism do you presently use today to measure or test for any kind of contamination? Say, all your meter users, and you also know who have installed backflows. How do you, is there a mechanism that you use regularly to test for contamination for the non-backflow users?
We test the water system every day for various contaminants. This specific concern is about water running the opposite direction of usual. I mean, usually the water is running from our pumps and our treatment plants into people's houses. It's only under very specific emergency situations that water flows back. So we have no test procedure to test water to see if people are contaminating. Usually the water is flowing from our side to theirs. In the case of a break in a line, in the case of a car running into a fire hydrant, in the case of a fire where there's a lot of flow coming out of a fire hydrant, that flow could possibly reverse. And it's only under those circumstances that a backflow preventer is even needed. So we have no way to know up front that's going to happen and put testing into place. So there is no way to test. First, there's an assumption that no one is contaminating the system because water flows from our side to theirs, not vice versa. And there is no testing protocol that's really available to say, well, we think there's going to be a backflow condition. Let's get ready to test. Okay. So no, there's no way to test this.
Thank you. So that's my question. I mean, if we don't have any way to test that, why are we putting all this in place? And yes, we do need it, but what's our guarantee that all testing will identify contamination? Thank you, Chair.
Members, initially, the chair was open towards, reflecting from the previous meeting, we were all aware and all aligned with saying that, health and safety for our constituents is important. At the same time, we were not wanting to go back to retroactive, but yet try to be open moving forward. Any new construction would be there. But in light of getting clarified with the role of the state and the powers that the state has, and if we were to move forward with an ordinance here locally, then we give up that ability where the state would be able to apply retroactively. At this time, the chair would entertain a deference of this issue until I could ask meetings with Corporation Counsel to understand the roles of protections from the state and the roles of protection and enforcement that we would have with our department if and should we ever bring this issue back around. So if we could.
Defer, I have a question.
Okay, you have a question?
Yeah,
Go
so I agree with you. But before you close this out for today and defer it, I'm looking at the remark, I guess, which is 517 remark, and I noticed that you've crossed out commercial in it. Excuse me. So therefore, are you saying that it's all permits, which will be residential? I'm particularly concerned about upcountry, and how would this affect upcountry water meters and existing customers and, well, new customers? I guess we're talking about that, but what about existing customers, and what is the impact for that?
Okay, going to your first question with regard to crossing out commercial. At that May 17th meeting, I believe that I told OCS staff, let's go back to the original 921 draft, because this is a new council, new committee that may not have reviewed that original draft that was presented by the department. So any cross-offs, or additions and cross-offs after the September 21 draft was really done by OCS staff after listening to the discussion at the committee. So, so my direction to the chair was, let's go back to this September 21st draft and have this committee, this present committee, take a full look at that. If they want to move, if you folks want to move off towards the direction of the red line, then that's, your prerogative. But I didn't feel that the current makeup of this committee fully reviewed the department's first draft, that September 21st draft. And I think the director can answer the second question with regard to upcountry.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you.
Member Sugimura, it wouldn't affect any area different than any other area. So how it would affect upcountry to be the same as everywhere else? If somebody came in and they were offered a meter on the upcountry meter list, if it was a simple house, if it was a new construction, they'd probably have to put this in. If somebody's up there already and they're doing agriculture and it's a high-risk thing, we'd probably say you need to put in a backflow preventer. If somebody was existing and they weren't doing anything, we would probably, just like everywhere else, not do anything. So it's really no different in any of the areas.
So example, constituent can call in for Ihelani in Pukalani, the water flow is low. So I'm just wondering, just from a layman's perspective, because I don't understand your business, but I do hear constituent concerns. So if I live in a house in Pukalani and the water pressure is low and you're requiring me now, I'm an existing customer, to put in a backflow or whatever, does my water meter currently have any kind of system that would help you with this law, or would I have to pay more money to then conform to this new law? How much would that cost? And does it matter about my water pressure? So those are just kind of a layman's, resident, my constituent kind of questions that I'm anticipating.
In general, and I realize, a lot of the individual homeowners are confused by this. In general, something like this is not going to have a noticeable effect on your water pressure. Right? It's just not. I mean, whether your water pressure with or without this is going to be basically the same. As far as how much it costs, I think we covered that last time. I know Mr. Miyabuchi had an idea of how much it would cost a residential customer. Right? I think he can share that.
If I remember correctly, I think for it depends how many meters you already have out there and how many would require backflow, but I believe in a standard case, I think it was $800 or so for the installation of one, and for the yearly testing, I think it was maybe a couple $100, some numbers along those lines.
And my last question regarding a resident, because I am concerned about the impact of residents versus commercial, because you crossed out commercial, which makes it now for everybody. So all of us who have water meters, or how does our house right now accomplish the goal that you are asking today? Or does everybody who has a water or water from you or from us, the county, do we have to do something to retrofit to then conform to this request?
So under the proposed bill, either you have one of these right? Either practically, you either have one or you don't. Under the proposed bill, if passed, we'd have the authority to make anyone install one who didn't have one. What we're saying is, from a practical standpoint, we only intend to do that if there is some concern that there's a backflow concern on their side.
So you're not going to force everybody to do.
Again, in order to force everyone, we would have to go basically, door to door to door for thousands and thousands, which even if we wanted to, we don't have anywhere near that kind of resources. That would be a huge undertaking. So from a practical standpoint, we don't intend to. The retroactivity, again, is intended to be there when we need it. It's intended to be a scalpel that we can use when we need it. There's, again, just no practical way to go after everybody. But if we don't include the retroactivity, and this is something I've never faced before, as was brought up, it's very rare to have a county law override a state law. I mean, I've never seen that before. I've never seen a state law written in such that if we enact a county law, it overrides the state's authority. And when Ms. Wana brought that up, that became a sort of a game changer for us, because it all of a sudden made retroactivity so important, because we can't count on the state's retroactivity if we get rid of it. And that again, that was really a game changer for us. I've never seen state law overridden by county law before, and that's what really changed the whole discussion.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think Member King, then Member Cochran.
Okay, thank you. I support the intent to defer this matter, but I think also in further discussions, I would like to know specifically what is considered a hazardous condition or high risk if we go into retroactivity, because I do have those same concerns that were brought up by a testifier earlier about people who just want to get a permit to put in a lanai, and now they have to put in a backflow preventer. And what if you look at that permit and you require a backflow preventer and they don't do it? I mean, unless we're just going to require everybody for every little permit that they do, which I think is extremely onerous. If we're not going to do that, then we're going to be looking at what are hazardous conditions where we would require something like that. And if there's a definition of that, possibly in HAR, that would be helpful. But I'm not comfortable with the statement that we're going to put this into our ordinance and require everybody to do it, but we're not going to really require everyone to do it because we can't go door to door. So we have to have, I think, some guidelines on when we do, so there's not a perception of somebody getting picked on when somebody else doesn't have to do it. So, to me, that's really important. We have to have some fair, in the interest of fairness, some guidelines for when we do require it. And I would really be hard-pressed to vote for this if it was requiring everybody who wanted to do some little adjustment to their property, to their house or something, to all of a sudden put in a backflow preventer if they're not, a safety hazard condition. Mm-hmm. So that's that's what I would like to see happen when it comes back to the committee.
Okay, Ms. Zawala.
I just want to point out for Member King, in the definition of cross-connection in the proposed bill, it does say, mention what kinds of substances that they're looking for, and it's basically any used water, industrial fluid, gas, or substance other than the intended potable water with which the system is supplied.
Okay, but does it give actual conditions of what that might entail? Like, we heard earlier that if you put in a swimming pool, you're not necessarily at risk because, the backflow is above the water level. So, are we going to require everybody, even if they're not, for every little incident, even if they're not a potential hazard or high risk to contamination, to do this? Because it's an expensive thing, and we've either got to make everybody do it, or we're just going to be picking on people when they get reported.
Member King, we agree that is the concern. Just to a specific thing you said, the swimming pool where the fill is above, that is called an air gap. That is a acceptable backflow prevention methodology, is to physically have distance. We have a pipe up here and it fills a bucket down there and it can't back up into it. That is a backflow prevention device, having a air gap.
Okay.
So things like that that is an acceptable backflow
Okay,
prevention.
so we need to probably, I don't know if that's in here. I haven't read through this whole bill, but I don't remember seeing that in your presentation when you came in. You showed us what backflow prevention is. I don't remember that being specifically pointed out that would qualify. So maybe we need some list of what types of different types of backflow preventers will qualify as well.
Mr. Chair, can I clean up I made a mistake in an earlier response to Ms. Sugimura. Can I clean that up?
Yes.
I was incorrect when you asked it would affect a low pressure situation. And, if pressure is 80 or 90 PSI and you put this in and maybe you lose 10 or 15 pounds of pressure, no one's going to notice. However, if somebody already has low pressure in the 25 or 30 PSI range, this could reduce that another 10 or 15. And so that they might notice that. So I just want to be clear that in people who have low pressure already, it might be noticeable.
Thank you. I think, Member King, did you have another question?
I'm fine, thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
Member Cochran.
Thank you. And so I'm trying to figure out, is there a fee schedule, in our budget our budget ordinance for this? Is it broken down? It was mentioned standard around $800 to install. Do we address that during our budget ordinance?
In this case, because there wouldn't be any direct services from us other than administration, which we don't charge for, this would be something that the owner would contract with a private company to do. So we don't control the fees for that. It's not a service we would provide. So there doesn't need to be. So these costs we're putting out there are what we believe the contractors will charge. We don't provide the service.
Okay, because I'm trying to kind of get a concrete figure in my head what page 6 is all about in reference to bond or surety bonds that you are going to say needs to be put down with the department for the cost of the work required to be done, plus 50% estimated by the director. So what's the dollar figure in there? Right? So you're going to make the people give you the money to get this work done, and then you're going to add another 50% of something onto that. So can you explain all that?
I believe that's a bond. This covers a situation where somebody comes in and says, I really want my building permit now. I'll put in my backflow preventer later. I just want to do both simultaneously. I want to get started. I'll do it later. This is a bond that they'd have to put down with us in that situation, so that if they finish their building and never get around to it, then we would go after that bond, use that money, and we'd hire a contractor to do it. So this is just the price of the bond for the work that we'd have to go do, similar to how we do other improvements that are dedicated to the county. We give a subdivision approval with a bond, so if they don't finish the work to be dedicated to the county, we can get the bond and we can hire somebody to do it. This is very analogous to that.
Okay, and then lastly, Chair, you mentioned I was curious about an appeal process. If someone were to say, why are you saying I'm high risk? I'm clearly not. And now, so should that be written in here somewhere? There's a civil penalty, fine of sorts, or is that just assume that everyone has that opportunity to go to the Board of Water Testing?
Any decision, I'm sure Corp Counsel can go through the details if you want, but any decision of the director can be appealed to the Board of Water Supply. And there is an ordinance that covers how that happens. So essentially, if somebody writes a letter and I'm saying, I'm going to pull your meter unless you do this, that is a decision by the director that can be appealed to the Board of Water Supply. So there's already an ordinance that covers all of those, whether it's this or any other decision on behalf of the director.
Okay. I just trying to work on another bill, and it's so important that those words need to be in the bill, and I just didn't see it here.
This one, specific to Department of Water Supply, can be found in Chapter 1411, Appeals to the Board of Water Supply. So that's a separate section in the Title 14.
Okay. Member Crivello?
Thank you, Chair. I support your intent to defer, and I can appreciate your mentioning about doing more work with Corp Counsel, and I especially with. It's interesting how the Department of Health puts in this wording too, I think. What supersedes, because then they get relieved of their kuleana, which is, and then do we have the resources to implement with the
Exactly.
water department to do inspections, do testings if we're not even able to do it today. So I believe there is more work for this and with all the questions that are coming up. So I appreciate that you defer it as you suggested.
That's exactly where my hesitancy after receiving more data is that initially my intention was to look at this proposed bill, look for an amendment not addressing retroactively, but to look at it from today on, moving forward, any new construction, let's make that. But if we make that into an ordinance, then it relieves the state to be able to, what they have right now, the ability to address retroactively. So we need to address that, and I think that's why I would want to entertain that. I see Member Sugimori, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. So one last thought. So does this, because it's related, does any of this have to be included in the plumbing code? Is there any kind of reach that we need to clarify in other sections of our Maui County Code?
We don't think there need to be changes anywhere else. The plumbing code has some other requirements for plumbing within the house and things like that. But I think one thing, this isn't going to change anyone's mind. It's not even really germane to the details of this. Just because you mentioned the plumbing code, when the council adopts the plumbing code, the council doesn't go through every page. Council says we adopt the 2006, plumbing code or whatever. You look at drainage, wastewater. It's only in water that engineering standards are in ordinances. There's nothing else the council does that gets into this level of detail. And one of the reasons I think that as we migrated from the board to the county, it's almost like we didn't right-size this. We didn't say, look, details like this go in standards that are adopted by the department level or the board. The council really took the engineering standards as ordinances, where none of the other county functions have this level of detail in ordinance. It's always done at the department level through either administrative rules or something like that. And I think that's maybe just something to keep in the back of your mind is, does the council and the Water Resources Committee want to continue to try to be the engineering standards authors for the Department of Water Supply, plumbing needs, for lack of better terms? Or is this something that really is too technical and should be handled like the plumbing code, which we just use AWWA standards, and the committee just recommends approval of using the AWWA standards and things like that. So it's just something I wanted to throw out there because it doesn't seem to fit in with the other work this council does with analogous things in other departments. You're much, much more detailed with our ordinances than with anyone else's. And I just think that's something, to note.
Thank you. That's it. Member Cochran.
In your presentation, your last screen has 4 bullet points in reference to the plumbing code. And I don't recall seeing that, so I must have not, I probably wasn't in attendance to that particular meeting when you gave that presentation. So I'm thinking perhaps those 4 bullet points were you trying to point to where it's mentioned in plumbing code, and this is how it relates to this ordinance, and is that what that
That's
screen
correct.
was for?
There's certainly some redundancy, and there was some discussion that, look, perhaps we could do this whole thing just with better enforcement of the plumbing code. That becomes difficult because, again, of the engineering details in this ordinance. Those aren't in the plumbing code. And also just from a practical standpoint, the plumbing code is enforced by Public Works Development Services Administration, not by Department of Water Supply. And because this is something that protects our system, having it in our ordinance with the Director of Water Supply being the enforcer makes it cleaner rather than us trying to take action through Public Works DSA. So there may be some overlap, but the bottom line is it would be our ordinance that would, from a practical standpoint, be implemented on the community, not requirements of the plumbing code, even though they're consistent.
And lastly, chairs, so I'm looking back at correspondence from Ms. Baisa back in the day, about a year from to now, a year ago, asking Public Works certain questions about what goes across their desk versus what goes across DWS's desk. And it was asked about the new building permits, that it only goes, building permit applications for other new structures on property served by county water system are sent to DWS for review. So you don't actually, this is just an additional. Is that why is a building permit application for a new structure not routed to Department of Water Supply for approval, is the question. And the Public Works says that only building permit applications for the first dwelling served by County of Water are not sent to Department of Water. It's the second dwelling sent. So how does this all relate?
It gets a little, I think it gets a little out of the what's on the agenda for today's meeting, and maybe it's subject for a different meeting. But how permits are processed and what we see and what we don't, and how interaction is done between us and fire and Public Works, that's this whole other issue of just more like internal, how the sausage is made. The bottom line is we try to say, look, there are laws and codes that are adopted by the council, and the entity of the administration is trying to enforce and administer them all between the different departments and trying to keep that consistent. But exactly the internal workings of what exactly goes where and who's sharing spreadsheets, I'm not prepared to really talk about exactly how permits are processed between us and Public Works right now.
Okay. Member Cochran, maybe at this time, to stay on agenda, I'll direct staff to notate that this will be another potential item on a future agenda to address water supply's involvement in initial building permits.
Right, and so, sorry, yeah, and thank you, Chair. So I think just to follow up on this November 21st, 2016 response from Public Works in reference to Department of Water Supply's participation or lack of at certain levels of the permitting process, I think would be helpful. And there's an open-ended question here that was never addressed in this submittal about more further information. And at the time of this memo, it was stated they could not provide this report by the deadline. So this is a year later. Perhaps Public Works has had time to further, delve into the information that was being asked of this memo. So I'd like to follow up with that if that's possible.
Okay, staff, we'll follow up with that.
Thank you.
Okay, members, any other questions? Seeing no other questions, I hope you can understand the intentions that we want to go forward. I want to thank everyone's questioning and communications, and thank the staff today. But the chair's intention, without any objections, is to defer this matter.
Objections.
And being that there being no further business, this meeting of the Water Resources Committee is going to be adjourned.